signs are so obvious. They came out of the Wuhan lab, and I think if anybody thinks anything differently, they're just kidding themselves. So you can ask, China has to pay. They have to do something. They have to pay reparations. And China doesn't have the money to pay those reparations. I believe that worldwide, I'm not just talking United States, worldwide, $60 trillion of damage. 60 trillion. China doesn't have $60 trillion, but they have to do something to make up for what they've done. What they've done to the world is so horrible.
China lied and people died. It seems more and more people are agreeing now that the COVID-19 virus came from a lab. It was in fact biological warfare that CCP unleashed on the rest of the world, and then they tried to cover it up. But now it seems that the day of reckoning has come for China. After a bombshell lawsuit, US is moving forward with seizing Chinese-owned land here in the United States. And it's all happening because of Missouri. Here's more details.
Attorney General Andrew Bailey won a lawsuit against China claiming they hoarded PPE during the pandemic, and China was ordered to pay $24.5 billion. Chinese officials said they don't recognize the ruling and called the lawsuit absurd when it was filed back in 2020. Now Bailey says he's preparing to seize Chinese assets in the state to get the money, and the assets include that farmland we've talked about a lot here on American Sunrise.
Now, last time we made a video about CCP and COVID. The video was covering the bipartisan congressional report that was detailing how COVID was not a natural virus. It was in fact lab grown. This was at the end of 2022. But our video was mass reported by CCP bots, and because of that it was demonetized and restricted, and we were forced to take it down. Now I'm sure the CCP bots will try something similar on this video. So if you guys can do us a big favor and hit that like and subscribe button down below, it helps us out tremendously in counteracting the CCP bots. Now let's talk about this Missouri lawsuit, because we learned a lot of things and I'm sure you guys have a lot of questions based on the clip you just watched. Now first, let's go over the lawsuit and then we'll talk about the Chinese farmlands. So this lawsuit was filed in Missouri, and it was in fact filed back in 2020 when COVID first started. And the lawsuit basically alleged that the Chinese government was withholding information about the existence and the spread of the COVID virus, and then they cut off the supply of personal protective equipment from the rest of the world. Back in 2020, alleging something like this was basically a no-go, especially on platforms like Twitter, YouTube, and even Instagram. In fact, I know people who lost their livelihood for saying that CCP started COVID. Insane. But now, 5 years later, this lawsuit is concluded and we have evidence of China doing all these things. So let's go through what was presented in this lawsuit. The Chinese Communist Party got hit with a massive $24 billion judgment in Missouri for COVID cover-up and PPE hoarding. This was in fact the biggest judgment in Missouri history, 6 times larger than the previous biggest judgment. So why was the CCP hit with such a big amount? Because they deliberately hoarded medical supplies while lying to the world about COVID-19. CCP knew about COVID's human transmission back in September 2029. And might I remind you guys that first official case of COVID was confirmed in December 2019. That's why we call it COVID-19. But now we know that CCP knew about this months before the first case was confirmed. And the reason CCP knew about this is because there were whistleblowers in China that were sounding alarms about this dangerous virus. So what did CCP actually do with these whistleblowers? Well, they silenced them, they quarantined all the medical staff in secret, and denied everything until it was too late for the world to prepare. But all this time, CCP was preparing because they knew how bad this was. Here's the kicker. While they were lying, they were busy buying up all the world's medical supplies. Australia, Canada, US, they cleaned us out before we knew what hit us. The numbers are staggering. $8 billion in PPE losses for Missouri alone. Prices went through the roof, tax revenues collapsed, and countless needless deaths. Now, I think we all know how badly COVID went. Even though $24 billion is a big amount, it's nowhere near enough to what China should be paying the world. Worldwide, we lost 7 million lives. That's just what's confirmed. For hundreds of millions more, they lost their job, they lost their business, and some even lost loved ones. All those people deserve justice, and that's why I don't think the world is gonna forget about what CCP did during COVID. But even with the $24 billion judgment that Missouri got, China is not willing to pay that. So what is Missouri doing? They're going after assets China owns here in the United States. And one of the biggest assets that China was accumulating over the last half a decade was American farmland. Here's more details on this.
The Chinese spy balloon was right above us. That woke a lot of people up.
And it's not just worries about America's vulnerability from the air. Now, one of Montana's senators is pushing to keep the Chinese government from buying land nationwide.
China is not our friend right now, and the Chinese Communist Party wants to do bad things.
Senator John Tester is proposing a ban on entities with ties to China and 3 other foreign adversaries from buying American farmland, and wants to beef up monitoring of land transactions to foreign buyers.
Right now, we're not paying any attention to it.
The push to prohibit foreign land purchases from China has exploded across America. 15 states have passed laws regulating the practice. Much of the focus coming after controversial purchases in Texas and North Dakota, where Chinese companies bought land and failed to disclose it to the U.S. government. In Grand Forks, North Dakota, city officials recently blocked construction on land purchased by a Chinese company just 12 miles from Grand Forks Air Force Base. The company has said it's just a corn mill and not an espionage risk. But the Air Force had warned that the project presented a, quote, significant threat to national security. Overall, U.S. intelligence rates the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, as a top security threat.
The CCP represents both the leading and most consequential threat to U.S. national security and leadership globally.
Now, we don't even know exactly how much land China has purchased here in the United States because they don't disclose it to proper authorities. So we never find out. The reason this is such a big issue is, as you guys just heard, a lot of these Chinese lands are next to US Army bases, US Air Force bases. That's a huge national security issue, especially considering that over the last year we have seen a lot of unidentified drones flying over US bases, and according to US law, the army personnel in these bases can now just shoot the drone down. Here on your screen you can see a map of all the American bases and all the confirmed Chinese land that are very close to these bases. Again, I want to remind everyone, we don't exactly know how much land China owns, because not every purchase gets reported to proper authorities. Now here's the report we have from last year, so it is from 2024, but this shows exactly why this is concerning. China has been buying up strategically placed farmland next to military installations across the US, raising national security fears over potential espionage or even sabotage. The New York Post has identified 19 bases across the US from Florida to Hawaii, which are in close proximity to the land bought up by Chinese entities and could be exploited by spies working for the communist nation. Robert S. Spalding III, a retired United States Air Force Brigadier General whose work focuses on US-China relations, told the Post, "It is concerning due to the proximity to the strategic locations. These locations can be used to set up intelligence collection sites, and the owners can be influential in local politics, as we have seen in the past. It is alarming we do not have laws on the book that would prevent the Chinese from buying property in the US. Under the guise of farming, the Chinese landowners could set up a reconnaissance sites, install tracking technology, use radar and infrared scanning to view bases or attempt to fly drones over them as a way to surveil military sites," sources told the Post. A report in the Wall Street Journal from September 2023 found Chinese intruders attempted to breach military facilities over 100 times in recent years, including sneaking onto a missile range in New Mexico and scuba divers spotted near a government rocket launch site in Florida. This is insane. In fact, just 3 months ago, we had a Chinese citizen get arrested here in the United States for illegally flying a drone above a military site. Here's that report.
Meanwhile, a Chinese citizen living in Los Angeles is under arrest this morning for allegedly using a drone to take images of Vandenberg Space Force Base in Santa Barbara County.
By the way, I don't think that Chinese national should be put through the civilian justice system. This was a military violation. Person should be in a military brig, because clearly the civilian system can't process these people properly and quickly enough, and we need to take them off the streets.
Now, luckily for all of us, Missouri is now going after all the land that China owns here in the United States. Missouri has started seizing 42,000 acres of farmland owned by China in a bold enforcement of action to collect $24 billion judgment against China over handling of the COVID. This is what Missouri Attorney General Andrew Bailey said. If China won't pay the award, the state will seize Chinese-owned assets, including farmland. Those assets are not required to be within Missouri and can be located anywhere within the United States. While we have not partnered with other states on this particular suit, we encourage others to work to hold the Chinese government accountable and seek justice for victims. Now, as of now, we don't know what other states are going to go after China for what they did with COVID, but the US government is going after China. In fact, the Trump administration has updated the official government COVID website, and this is what it looks like now. This is covid.gov. This is what you see if you go to the site now. This was recently updated, and now it shows 5 pointers as to why COVID originated in a lab. Point number 1. The virus possesses a biological characteristic that is not found in nature. Point number 2. Data shows that all COVID-19 cases stem from a single introduction into human. This runs contrary to previous pandemics where there were multiple spillover events. Point number 3. Wuhan is home to China's foremost SARS research lab, which has history of conducting gain-of-function research, gene altering and organism supercharging at inadequate biosafety levels. Point number 4. Wuhan Institute of Virology, WIV. Researchers were sick with COVID-like symptoms in the fall of 2019. Now we just covered this. This was September 2019. This was months before COVID-19 was discovered at the wet market. Point number 5. By nearly all measures of science, if there was evidence of natural origin, it would have already surfaced. But it hasn't. By process of elimination, it has to be a lab origin virus. Now, China knew all this and it was trying to hide it. You know how I know this? Because every time any country called for an investigation into how COVID was originated, they would go after that country. They would attack that country like it has declared war on China. Why was China so combative about an investigation into COVID origins? Because it had something to hide. And now the whole world knows what China was hiding. As someone who has been following CCP's actions for almost half a decade now, it's just laughable to me that CCP is complaining about US tariffs. Because guess what CCP did when Australia called for investigation into coronavirus's origins? I'll give you guys one guess. Well, China retaliated by placing tariffs on Australian exports into the Chinese markets. Why would China do this? Clearly, it was not happy with what Australia was calling for, and that's because CCP had something to hide. Now, this was something we were covering almost 2 years ago, and CCP bots mass reported our video. And we weren't even just floating a theory. We were talking about a US congressional report that came from a bipartisan committee in the Senate. And even then, YouTube did not let us keep the video up. It was demonetized and restricted. But here again, I have a segment from that video, and hopefully this time we don't get demonetized and restricted. Before I play this clip, I have a quick favor again. Please be sure to hit that like and subscribe button down below if you haven't already, and here's the clip.
The US Senate Intelligence Committee just released a report detailing that COVID-19 virus was most likely created in Wuhan lab, and then a modified dangerous strain leaked out and infected the rest of the world, giving us this.
Shortage of beds and equipment.
And more than 500,000 people worldwide,
more than 11 million people,
have lost their lives.
Estimating that 15 million deaths globally.
You should not go out and you should stay at home.
The World Health Organization has officially called it COVID-19.
What was considered a conspiracy theory is beginning to come up as the likely root cause, with scientists all over the world supporting it as fact. Worst part of this all, the leading expert who said that lab leak theory was a hoax, this guy, he is being paid by the CCP. His organization actually gets millions of dollars from CCP to perform research at the Wuhan lab, the same lab that probably leaked COVID-19. So no wonder the CCP doesn't want people investigating the lab leak theory.
The biggest question here regarding the virus, where did it come from?
Wuhan Virology Institute. The coronavirus pandemic is believed to have started.
The virus leaked out of a laboratory.
Highly secure and highly controversial lab.
You think it's possible this virus was engineered within that lab and leaked?
You see, based on precedent and genomics, COVID-19 has been believed to have crossed over the species barrier from an intermediate host to humans, with the general belief being that there was a bat-to-human spillover. The truth, however, is that this is no more fact than any other theory out there, as there is no critical evidence that would prove this true. The facts about the pandemic being caused by a natural zoonotic spillover are simply missing. Hold on. Before you riot in the comment section, let me explain the gaps that lie in the theory as reflected through the Senate's research. Firstly, the intermediate host species for the coronavirus, if one exists, remains unidentified. A quick look on the website of the National Center of Biotechnology Information shows you this. Yes, the intermediate host isn't pangolins, as mainstream news has reported. That host species is still quite unknown after 3 long years. By comparison, within 6 months of the first known human case of SARS, public health officials in China found SARS infections in palm civets and raccoon dogs in live animal markets in Guangdong province. Fishy, isn't it? Secondly, unlike SARS, the genomes of early COVID-19 cases from the first months of the pandemic do not show genetic evidence of the coronavirus strain having circulated in another animal species other than humans. Even at the ground zero sites in the Wuhan wet market where the animals reportedly infected humans, none of the animals tested were infected with the SARS-CoV strain, according to presentations by PRC officials to the World Health Organization. Thirdly, the SARS-CoV strain's high binding affinity for human receptors suggests that it is possible for it to directly infect humans without needing a period of adaptation in an intermediate host whatsoever. This limits the chances of their having had the natural zoonotic spillover. Also, while direct bat-to-human spillover of coronavirus has never been confirmed to cause a human outbreak, it is theoretically possible, and there is circumstantial evidence suggesting it may occur under limited specific circumstances. But in a practical setting, the chances are extremely low. Even lower are the chances that the outbreak would start in central China and not southern China where the bats reside. More on that later. Lastly, based on the available evidence, Wuhan is the only location where the SARS-CoV strain spilled over into humans. What then makes it odd is that just after the unidentified source transmitted the virus to humans, it stopped transmitting the virus. This is at odds with the precedent of the 2002-2004 SARS epidemic, where infected palm civets continued to transmit the virus to humans and to raccoon dogs. Because if we're being frank, why did the transmission stop? Why was it a one and done type of situation? If the COVID-19 pandemic is the result of a zoonotic spillover from an intermediate host of the SARS-CoV strain, the virus would be expected to continue to circulate in the infected intermediate host population, creating the potential for additional independent spillovers into humans and other animals as well. Assessing these factors and the available evidence put forward for the spillover theory, I'm sure you can clearly see the inconsistencies with both historic precedent and the scientific understanding of how natural zoonotic spillovers of respiratory viruses like SARS-CoV to occur. This pokes holes into the bats to humans Wuhan wet market theory that the mass media has run with. From a logical perspective, although we don't dismiss the theory entirely, in the absence of missing conclusive evidence, it's difficult to support the natural zoonotic origin hypothesis. The lab leak theory suggests that COVID-19 was due to human error that leaked the virus from a lab and unleashed it onto the world. Let me give a background for this so that you can understand why this theory has gained so much traction, especially recently. In the aftermath of the 2002-2004 SARS epidemic, Chinese authorities emphasized research on potential pandemic pathogens, including SARS-related coronaviruses, to develop vaccines and other medical countermeasures with the goal of attempting to predict and prevent the next coronavirus pandemic. They built a facility and turned Wuhan into a global hub of coronavirus research. The Wuhan Institute of Virology is China's premier coronavirus research institute, matched by only a handful of places worldwide. WIV researchers and their collaborators undertook large-scale virus collection expeditions to southern China and Southeast Asia, where bats naturally harbor SARS-related viruses, on an annual basis from 2004 onwards. During these expeditions, scientists collected bat blood, saliva and urine samples, allowing them to have hundreds of samples of variations of coronaviruses. It's here where the problem starts. The lab leak hypothesis points the finger at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which, by the way, is close to the Huanan seafood market where the first major cluster of infections occurred. The institute has a long history of collecting and analyzing bat coronaviruses. The generally popularized leak scenario usually goes something like this. It involves researchers tinkering around with the virus to investigate its properties, perhaps in gain-of-function experiments in which pathogens are modified to be more harmful in a bid to understand them better. This modified virus then somehow slipped through the lab's biosafety net, which has been criticized several times by many for being full of holes. From there, the world is infected and we have coronavirus as we know it. The lab leak theory is now so serious that the World Health Organization and US intelligence are both taking the hypothesis seriously. Just coming from a logistical perspective, what are the odds that a deadly virus breaks out in a city where there is a giant lab known to specialize in housing variants of the said pandemic virus? To add to that, there is a significant absence of evidence pointing to the virus having been transmitted by animals at all, meaning it likely passed from humans to humans the whole time. Add to that the fact that the blamed Wuhan wet markets were animal COVID free, as the animals there did not carry the alleged strain of the virus. Lastly, add again the fact that Chinese authorities have been adamant in refusing access to the lab for international parties or observers in pursuit of truth. In fact, anyone who has voiced out the lab leak theory, individual or nation alike, gains the wrath of the communist nation. Just ask Australia, who got sanctioned by China for it, if you don't believe me. The question becomes, is this all a coincidence? What has China got to hide? It all starts to seem less like a conspiracy and more like fact. For those who will point out that bats carry various coronaviruses and that they could have started it by transmitting it to humans, I pose this question to you. The bats that carry various coronaviruses are based in southern China. Absent human intervention, how then did this virus travel 1,000 miles only to emerge in Wuhan, which is in central China, without having infected the other regions in the process? Had the pandemic started in southern China, the zoonotic spillover theory would have credibility, but because it started in central China in Wuhan, we raise questions. Even Sir Jeremy Farrar, director of the Wellcome Trust, Europe's biggest philanthropic research funding body, notes in his best-selling book Spike, it was odd for a spillover event from animals to humans to take off in people so immediately and spectacularly in a city with a biolab, which is home to an almost unrivaled collection of bat viruses, especially with a new virus that seemed almost designed to infect human cells. If this were a coincidence, he adds, it would be a huge one. The Senate Committee on Health Education, Labour and Pensions wrote in their report, Nearly 3 years after the COVID-19 pandemic began, substantial evidence demonstrating that the COVID-19 pandemic was the result of a research-related incident has emerged. A research-related incident is consistent with the early epidemiology showing the rapid spread of the virus in Wuhan, with the earliest calls for assistance being located near the WIV's original campus in central Wuhan. It also explains the low genetic diversity of the earliest known SARS-CoV-2 human infections in Wuhan, because the likely index case would be an infected researcher who is the likely primary cause of the virus in Wuhan. A research-related incident also explains the failure to find an intermediate host, as well as the failure to find any animal infections predating Q19 cases. What makes it even more likely that a lab leak actually occurred is the fact that despite the WIV being a top center for housing viruses and biological weapons to a degree, the place was simply not secure. There is good documentation that reports a host of biosafety failures along with management and training concerns at the virology center. You would think that such a place that has the power to affect mankind would have the top standards of safety and staff, but nope. It's just like your local Walmart. Seriously though, they were notoriously lackluster in safety measures. Documented failures like this predating the pandemic have been listed in various reports since.
Now, the clip you just watched was from the congressional report that came out in 2022. And if you compare the video you just watched versus the Trump administration's new COVID website, it's pretty much the same information. And it's crazy that we couldn't say this 3 years ago. Wuhan lab is right there where the COVID-19 originated. They have had many incidents of breaking safety protocols before we had COVID-19 in 2029. So it makes sense that someone just accidentally leaked this highly contagious and deadly virus. But hopefully, now that we all know where it came from, more people will take action against China and for the cover-up that the CCP tried doing. YouTube is growing so fast that it has just overtaken Netflix to become the most popular app on TV. That's just on TV, by the way. If you combine TV, phones, computers, tablets, people are spending an insane amount of time watching YouTube. This is exactly why YouTube is paying creators $45,000 per minute. That's $64 million every single day. So, if you have ever thought about starting a YouTube channel for yourself, now is the perfect time. And if you're looking to learn how people grow on YouTube in 2025, like this guy who got millions of views in just few months of starting a channel, then I have a solution for you. This weekend, I'm holding a free bootcamp for beginners where I will share all our YouTube advice and answer any question you have about growing on YouTube. If you're interested in learning from this bootcamp, you can sign up by clicking the link in the description or scanning the QR code on your screen.